If I asked a modern audience to name DMA Design's most influential game, most of them would give me blank stares, and I wouldn't blame them because that name hasn't been used in over 20 years. However, many of us who were around in gaming 20 years ago know that DMA Design was the former name of the aptly named Rockstar North before it was integrated into Rockstar Studios as part of publisher Take-Two Interactive's acquisition of the studio from Infogrames. Now, of course, the most influential game from DMA Designs, or Rockstar North, was none other than Grand Theft Auto 3. Now, this wasn't the first GTA game. Both the franchise opener and sequel were released in 1997 and 1999 respectively. However, this was the first 3D-based GTA game, while its predecessors used a 2D top-down perspective. Now, this was a pivotal time for the industry, as up until the release of Grand Theft Auto 3, there had not really been a true, mostly continuous 3D world of such scale before. I say mostly because there is a slight pause when traversing between the islands, but honestly, in general play, it's continuous for 99% of the player's experience. One of the developers said at the time that they wanted Grand Theft Auto 3 to be a place you lived in as opposed to a thing you played, and the impressive 3D world certainly played a large part in achieving this. Timeline-wise, Grand Theft Auto 3 was initially released for the PlayStation 2 in October 2001, with the PC version following in May 2002. Now, the specific version of the game we're going to be looking at today is the original PC version. The only change that I've effected from this is a small tweak to enable the game to better render widescreen resolutions, as out of the box it stretches elements of the HUD, and I care about my audience's viewing pleasure. Now, I say original PC version because outside of the many re-releases that Grand Theft Auto 3 has seen over the years, in 2021 it saw somewhat of a remastering as part of a Grand Theft Auto 3 Definitive Edition, which dramatically changed the art style and several other elements of the game, arguably not for the better. This was reflected in the reviews at the time, with many outlets publishing generally unfavourable reviews. Regardless, the version we're looking at today is the original PC version, which was released to largely overwhelmingly positive reviews. With the move to the 3D engine, it also allowed the developers to implement a far more detailed narrative, complete with both a main storyline and many other storylines that the player can choose to participate in should they desire. The main story sees the player, an unnamed protagonist, escaping from police custody thanks to an attack on the convoy transporting him. The story subsequently follows the player meeting and completing jobs for various underworld figures. There's mafia, yakuza, cartels, pretty much every organised crime group that comes to mind is in the game, and you'll have the opportunity to work for or against all of them. The main story also weaves into the 3D open world from a narrative perspective. If you upset a particular group of people, their members are likely to open fire on you whenever you visit parts of their turf. Conversely, those who trust you will let you move through their turf without any issues. Outside of the main story, there are several side missions you can take throughout the game, with many being delivered via a quite novel way of sending you a pager message. Yeah, remember pagers? Instructing you to visit a payphone for more information. Both the main narrative and that of the side missions are all remarkably well executed. All of the characters you interact with have detailed backstories, fueled by well thought out writing, which helps build their story as you progress through the game, and it makes them a lot more memorable. In most games, there's a few characters who you remember long after the end credits have rolled. In GTA 3, you remember practically all of them. Before we continue, a massive thank you to everyone who supports the channel. If you enjoy this type of content, please do consider subscribing. It helps support the channel and you can be notified of new content the moment it drops. With that out of the way, let's grab a piece, jack a car, and head back to 2002 to remember Grand Theft Auto 3. Grand Theft Auto 3 is difficult to categorise from a gameplay genre perspective. At its core, it's an action-adventure game, but look under the covers and it's also a third-person shooter, driving sim, boating sim, and probably a few other subgenres mixed in. Now, on the surface, this sounds terrible. A lot of games that tackle multiple core genres often struggle, as the various mechanics often compete with one another rather than complement one another, but this isn't the case with GTA 3. I said earlier that GTA 3 was a pioneer in having a 3D world of such scale, and it's this exact 3D world that is the reason that all of these gameplay elements work together so well, because everything is tied into the consistency and game logic of that 3D open world. Fairly early on in the game, there's a mission which requires you to steal a Triad fish van to enter an enemy complex. Now, I'd seen the Triads driving vans around earlier, so I went and jacked a van and tried to enter, only to be told I needed a Triad fish van. Ah, wrong van, I got it. So I hunt around for a fish van and find one. Great. Get back to the Triad compound and I'm still denied entry. It's at this point that I recognise a van sporting a belly up decal inside the compound. Right, this is what I need. After I hunt around the area and find a belly up branded van, I'm able to enter the compound and elect to use the van itself to complete the mission objective. Now, in all of this, I never felt frustrated because the game was being completely fair and logical in the puzzle to enter. I just needed to solve this puzzle to progress. Another example of this comes in the form of a mission in which you need to collect an item, but realise once you collect it, it was actually an elaborately laid trap that you're about to get attacked by members of the Triad. Now, upon realising I was hopelessly outnumbered, I noticed the Triads had actually bought one of their vans, the same van I struggled to recognise earlier. And I opted to steal the van and proceeded to run them all over. Again, a great example of multiple mechanics working together underpinned by consistency. Now, as far as the game loop goes, it's not so much of a loop as it is a constantly winding path, because while you can focus on just completing the main story activities and the bare essential tasks to aid in this, the game offers so much more. There are some challenging missions in Grand Theft Auto 3, or missions which might require a little bit of extra help to progress. Thankfully, there are several gameplay elements offered which help reward exploration and achievement with things to aid in your overall progression. First, there's the hidden packages, a variety of hidden packages scattered around the game world which reward the player with a permanent weapon at their safe house for every 10 found. Then there's rampages, which task you with eliminating a specific number of enemies with a chosen weapon in exchange for a large amount of cash. Did I mention there's a timer? Which actually makes this quite difficult. There's even minigames which revolve around driving an ambulance to help sick passengers to get to the hospital or taking a cab for a spin, each with their own unique rewards. My point is that no two people will have the exact same progression experience. The game length can literally range from about 20 hours to 80 hours depending on your choices, and after spending around 30 hours in the game for this retrospective, I know there's still so much more I could go back and do. Back during its original release, this type of lengthy experience was not commonplace, with other third-person combat games like Max Payne clocking in at around 10 to 15 hours, and even very large RPG games like Gothic, despite clocking in just shy of GTA 3's total completion time, lacked the variety in player experience that GTA 3 delivered. But with all these gameplay systems, how do the basics like camera and control hold up? Well, pretty damn good. Camera control in any third-person game is always an important part of the experience. After all, if you can't see your character or the game world properly, you're in for a pretty rough time. Thankfully, during my playthrough of GTA 3, I don't recall the camera ever really becoming an issue, except for a few very minor bugs causing some clipping issues. The mostly freeform camera does a great job of allowing you to manipulate it to capture the best angle possible while on foot, with the only exception being a few Resident Evil-like cinematic shots leveraged by the game in certain enclosed indoor areas. Similarly, the view from vehicles is also great, with the camera even switching to a first-person mode to avoid environmental collision, which is especially helpful in some of the timed vehicle levels where an extra few seconds to reorient yourself can be the difference between success and failure. Control is equally solid, with the game using a combination of traditional shooter controls and mouse aiming while on foot to a more contemporary forward, back, left, right handbrake for driving. To make sure I gave myself the authentic GTA 3 PC experience, I chose to use the keyboard and mouse as the primary control input. A few observations here. While the PS2 version included an auto-aim for the majority of weapons, the PC does not, and I found the default sensitivity way too high for my liking, so I had to turn it right down. I don't know if it's a skill that's just left me to track an aiming reticle at high speed, or the game's locked 30 frames per second causing me visual issues, but when it came to aiming, all I'll say is I literally could not hit a barn door until I turned down the sensitivity. If you've got an opinion on this, do let me know down in the comments, because I'm convinced this can't just be me. Combat is a mixture of in-vehicle combat and on-foot combat, with the vehicle combat generally revolving around ramming other cars, while the on-foot combat generally relies on melee or shooting. I don't personally think that the shooting mechanics did anything new for the genre on release. There are some sniper elements which are kind of cool, but the game generally plays it mostly safe for the overall combat. Although it does hit the mark most of the time, I will go into detail later where I feel it doesn't. One of the more interesting things is that there's no autosave or even checkpoint save in GTA 3. If you want to save the game, you need to manually save your game via an in-game activity of entering one of your safe houses, which presents the opportunity to save. Now, generally I dislike these type of systems, but given this directly ties into the 3D world and the overall immersion, I'm going to forgive it. Now, I can't forgive everything though, and critiquing a game like Grand Theft Auto 3 is like critiquing the Pope. There's every chance that a pair of suits will lob up at your door the next day and you'll never be seen again. Alas, I shall continue. The first grievance I have is the on-foot combat. Now, don't get me wrong, the segments which use a scoped weapon are quite well done. Basically, anything that requires some planning and is not moment-to-moment combat is great and a lot of fun. These ranged encounters also give the player a lot of choice into how they choose to accomplish the goal. Again, a good thing. Where I find the combat doesn't work for me though, is in any type of close encounter with more than a few people. Your character is very flat-footed, meaning that mobility in combat is largely out of the question, so it generally revolves around you maneuvering to different vantage points to take out the enemies one by one. The challenge lies in that there is no cover system to protect you during these transitions, as well as audio design which does not really confirm when you've defeated an enemy, meaning you can be pumping bullets into someone long after you have actually defeated them. Combine this with a fairly bare-bones weapons system, which doesn't even include a reload mechanic, and the combat at times feels a lot more dated than it should. And then we've got the grenades. I'm just going to play a short video of me attempting to lob a grenade inside a window to complete a mission. Keep in mind, I have not edited this in any way. So yeah, not exactly brilliant grenade controls either. Outside of the combat challenges, the other I have revolves around the boating mechanics. Now, I get it, having boats in the game is cool. Not only can you drive around the city, but you can motor around the harbour. The issue is that the whole experience feels bare bones at best, and for the majority of missions involving water, feels more tacked on as a novelty as opposed to a fully fleshed out mechanic. Despite many attempts, I never actually successfully disembarked a boat to a wharf. Anytime I was using a boat, I had to beach it and then return to the city on foot. While this is frustrating, the overall freedom the game affords to be able to do this, all within a single open world, does make it a lot more bearable. Overall, the gameplay as a whole is exceptional for the time. You know you have a good game on your hands when even when you have challenges in the game, you can overcome them by using other elements of the game to compensate. As far as presentation goes, again you're getting an exceptional experience. The star of the show here is undoubtedly the 3D world, which is sprawling with not only pedestrians and traffic, but various locations which the player can visit and interact with. For the majority of the game, weapons can be purchased from the local ammunition stores, with the player able to exchange cash for weapons, while locations like the local pay and spray stores can instantly wipe your wanted level and give your vehicle a new paint job. And here's a nice touch. While you can take just about anything into a paint and spray to wipe your wanted level, you can't take a police van. I know because I tried. Graphically, the game is impressive for the time, with a fairly detailed game world complete with a lot of nice little touches. There are plenty of places in the game world that serve no other purpose than just to contribute to the overall living city element, and they all look and feel great. A lot of the early levels in each new area of the game that unlock feature a mission which takes you around the new map area, enabling you to get familiar with the new location, as well as show off some of the artistic flair in the new area. Now, while there aren't any licensed vehicles in the game, there really doesn't need to be, because the fictitious setting does a great job of overall world building that it doesn't matter what they're called or even modelled after, as long as they are pleasing to the eye and fun to use, which they all are. GTA 3 was a very graphically ambitious game, not so much for fidelity and nuanced things like lighting and shadows, but in sheer scale and detail. A level of quality which we arguably wouldn't see again until its sequel, Vice City, a few years later. Now, even over 20 years after its initial release, the overall sound design still holds up exceptionally well. All of the key characters are voiced by top-tier talent, with several featuring previous roles in shows like The Sopranos and Goodfellas, productions which have some striking similarities to the overall core narrative being told here. The voice acting here does go a long way in helping to establish the overall world building and helps to sell the characters' stories a lot more than an arbitrary text dump or rather generic voice acting. Another thing which goes a long way towards the world building is the car radio concept. Essentially, all of the mainstream vehicles feature a radio which can be cycled to play a variety of stations, some featuring licensed music tracks, while other feature talkback radio and commercials for things far outside the accepted norm. There's literally hours upon hours of content here, and it's a great way to keep the driving segments feeling fresh regardless of the journey you're taking. Lastly, the majority of the sound effects are good, however the weapon sounds disappointed me, lacking an overall impactful sound and being lost to other sounds in the environment. It's not a showstopper, but as I mentioned before, it contributes to a lack of overall situational awareness when in combat. Now, every once in a while, a game releases which sets a new benchmark for the genre, a game that takes risks that pay off and redefine what the genre can be. Grand Theft Auto 3 is one of these games. Not only was GTA 3 a great game upon release, but it served as a template for virtually every subsequent release in the series. Grand Theft Auto 5, which has sold over 190 million copies worldwide and is continuing to sell, leverages pretty much all of the core mechanics established over a decade earlier in Grand Theft Auto 3. Then you have other open world games like the Assassin's Creed series, Batman series, Spider-Man series, and many more, which all borrow concepts which initially featured in GTA 3. Regardless of my personal opinions on the recent definitive edition release of Grand Theft Auto 3, there's a reason the publishers are still marketing this game, because on balance, it still not only holds up in modern times, but is a lot more fun than many of the copycat games created. If you haven't experienced GTA 3, do yourself a favour and check it out. I'm very sure you won't regret it. But that's enough from me. Do you agree or disagree with my opinions? Let me know down in the comments below. And as always, thanks for watching.